Hello, people of YouTube, Spotify, or wherever else you may be listening to this too. I'm Anna, aka articulateComposed, and welcome to the second episode of the articulateCast, conversations about capitalism and creativity. Today, our special guest is my lovely girlfriend, Jonaya, who you likely know if you are a fan of my channel or a fan of the type of stuff I tend to do online. And Jonaya is here today to talk about the myth of the creative professional. Jonaya, can you please introduce yourself and also specifically talk about the types of creation you've done over the years?
Yeah, hi. So my name is Jonaya Riley. If you're familiar with Anna's channel, you're probably at least passingly familiar with who I am. As far as creative stuff, I have at various points been a professional photographer. I have done a whole lot of writing. I've done a number of different games in various capacities and game modding. I do voice acting. I do a lot of different things. I primarily focus on writing and game dev, but, I've kind of dabbled in basically whatever struck my fancy at various points.
I don't want the listeners to only know about what you've created. I also want them to know about your training. When it comes to your professional training, what is your history?
Okay, so like all of it or is relevant to art?
All of it.
Okay, so I have a bachelor's in science in mathematics with a program that focuses primarily on applied math, so primarily statistics and probability. I wanted to be an actuary for a little bit. If you don't know what that is, don't worry about it. I took one of the tests to become an actuary, bombed it super hard, and then I've spent some time working as an insurance underwriter. If you don't know what that is, don't worry about it. I also spent some time as a data analyst working for a company that sells aircraft parts. And then I've spent many, many years working as a software developer in the insurance industry. So professionally, I write back-end like insurance software for a living. And that's it as far as my professional training goes. I actually don't have any professional training in software development other than years and years of work experience and one class I had to take for my math degree when I'd already been doing software professionally for a couple of years. But, other than that, so that's my professional background.
So for any new listeners, if you haven't already listened to the previous episodes or have not been following my, creative life online and all that, I am a composer by trade. I have a composition bachelor's degree and a musical theater writing master's degree. All of my training has been creative. I've had decades of music lessons. I'm now a piano teacher and voice teacher, so I, have enough training in music and instruments to teach them. And creatively, I do, on top of writing music, I also do playwriting, script writing, that kind of stuff, and voice acting as well. I have no formal training in voice acting whatsoever, and I have a little bit of playwriting training. I took some playwriting classes, book writing classes in grad school. I didn't consider myself a writer, period, until after I graduated grad school and a play that I wrote for class got performed. So I have a slightly different perspective on creativity and what you need to become a creative than Jonaya does, and I am starting to realize I may be wrong in my perspective. I was always taught to believe that to do something, you must have a degree in it. If you want to be a composer, you get a degree in composition. And I always... Honestly, after getting my bachelor's in composition, I didn't even consider myself a professional yet. I thought I had to have a master's in some kind of composing field to consider myself a professional composer. Right after graduating undergrad, I still considered myself, pre-professional. I was still a kid dabbling in taking commissions, But it's okay, I am a professional composer, but I am an amateur voice actor, and I am an amateur, before I did, playwriting classes in grad school, an amateur fanfic writer who's written one fanfic. I did not consider myself a professional anything except in composition because I have a degree in that. But, Jonaya, as somebody who does not have a degree in any creative field, would you consider yourself a professional writer, a professional photographer, a professional voice actor, etc.?
So, I think that's a really interesting question, and I know, what was the title we were going with on this episode?
The Myth of the Creative Profession.
I was going to say, I knew it was somewhat inflammatory, in spite of the somewhat inflammatory working title. I think the distinction between amateur and professional is a lot fuzzier than a lot of people give it credit for, and, as far as myself goes, the question, would I consider myself a professional writer or a professional voice actor? The answer is kind of eh? I've been paid to do voice work, not a lot, but I don't really do it in a professional capacity. I mostly do it to support other creative stuff that I'm a part of. And game dev and writing, it's again, because we've got a game on Steam. And, I made a bunch of games, and I hold myself to professional standards, and, I consider, our studio is an indie studio, but, we also don't make any money off of it.
But the plans for Studio June are to do commercial games.
Oh, yeah, 100%.
Will you be a professional game dev once you have created a for-profit game? Is that the line that we're drawing?
Yeah, I feel like that's kind of the line I draw, or how you approach it. Photography, I've made money off of it. I've got a book published, an actual published book. I've sold prints. I've done photography for, various people on commission. I definitely of all the creative things I do, photography is the one that I'm the most comfortable saying, yes, I am absolutely 100%, of a professional quality. I'm much more self-conscious about my writing, but I think I'm a pretty good writer. And I'm literally a professional software developer. I don't do games for a living, but I get paid money to write software. That is what I pay my bills with. So I think the thing is, it's a very kind of fuzzy line. And I think for me, the real thing comes down to you're talking about getting a degree, and that's where I think it kind of becomes a lot hazier, because I don't see a degree as useless, but I also don't see it as a prerequisite to becoming to having a professional approach to work. I feel like the part of the problem is the term professional is very slippery.
And a degree certainly is not worthless.
Right. Oh no, I don't think that.
I think we might have to change our perspective on what a degree is useful for. Or at least I do. Because my musical theater writing degree was certainly very useful in getting me into the musical theater writing community, which is a pretty tight-knit and hard to get in without an in type of community. So yeah, I paid NYU prices to have a bunch of connections.
Yeah, 100%. And like I was saying before, I don't have a degree in computer science. I don't have a degree in programming. All of my programming is stuff I learned either completely on my own, or I learned it through work. But the thing is, I've been doing it for 30 years now, because I started when I was a little kid. And you do something for a long time and you approach it in a systematic way and actually do research and learn how to do it right, you're going to become better at it. And I don't think my degree was useless either. The degree I have in math definitely helped me get the jobs I got. It's just, again, I think it's kind of hazy. I don't think getting a degree in creative writing is a waste of time. You learn a lot about writing, and you potentially make connections with people that can help you go into the area of writing you want to be a part of, with you in musical theater, or going to school for game dev, and you build connections, you build contacts, and you do learn stuff. I think it's more complicated than that, but I think that is one approach to learning how to do things.
And depending on how you learn personally best, that might be what's best for you. That is best for me. There are people who can learn 5 years of music theory on their own.
Yeah.
There are people who can just sit down and learn, like, the entirety of jazz theory just by looking at real books and watching YouTube videos.
Yeah.
I can't do that. I need somebody to stand in front of the classroom and, like, make me do exercises. I can't, I don't have that kind of internal motivation in the way that some people do.
What you're saying is you need someone to stand up in front of the class and be like, do you like jazz?
Yeah, pretty much. Though, one question. So, where is the line drawn between amateur and professional, though? Because something like, say, Friendsim 2 by Studio June. Very high-quality visual novel. More complex coding-wise than the original Friendsim, which was a paid game.
Yeah.
More complex in general, because it has voice acting, it's much longer.
Yeah.
There's more collaborators. So something like that. Where is the line drawn?
I think it's one of those questions that kind of verges into the unanswerable at times because, like, you know, there's the really simple explanation, which is that if you've been paid to do something, then you're a professional at it, which is, like, you know, that's a pretty serviceable definition. But, like, also there's a question of, like, what level of, like, what standards are you putting into it? Like, how do you approach it? And, like, if you start to go into that territory, like, I think it becomes much broader. Like, Friendsim 2 is not a commercial game. No one's being paid to do it. Well, I'm sorry. I'm not being paid to do it. Everyone else. Everyone
That's
except for me.
People are being paid.
Yeah, I would say Friendsim 2 is a professional project. It is a fan work. It is not being held to, like, canonicity standards. But also, like, people are being paid to do it. And I hold both them and myself to, you know, not super stringent standards in terms of, like, deadlines and timing, but, like, you know, people are held to a standard of both production quality and, like, getting stuff done that you wouldn't necessarily find in a wholly amateur project. And that's, like, again, I think that's the area where things can become a lot fuzzier and, like, you get into indie projects and, like, you know, when does something cross over from, oh, this is like a fun thing I made with a friend to, like, oh shit, this is something that we're making a living off of. Like, I feel like it's such a vague, it's such a moving target, I guess, is the best way to put it.
And also, being a free game shouldn't be what takes the line. Because, you know, there's plenty of games that we would all consider professional that are free. I mean, Deltarune, that is a professional game that Toby Fox has just decided to give out for free.
Yeah.
Doki Doki Literature Club was free.
Yeah, exactly.
What other games were free that are popular?
Every friggin' free mobile game. Like, just because it plays ads to make money doesn't mean the game itself.
Oh, yeah, totally. Yeah.
I think that might be more the distinction between a commercial and a non-commercial project. Maybe? Although that can get hazy,
But even then, I wouldn't say Deltarune's non-commercial. I think that's just Toby Fox decided to be nice because he's a
and, like, you can buy, like, Undertale on the Switch. You can buy Doki Doki Literature Club on the Switch. Like, there are ways to pay money for it. But yeah, I think, again, it's a very kind of hazy moving target. And by the same standards, like, do you stop being a professional photographer if you choose to work for, you know, a slightly lower rate because you're doing photography for a nonprofit or, you know, amateur theater?
Or for indie theater.
Yeah, exactly. So, like...
Thank you for giving me free photography. Aww. You're the best girlfriend ever.
Like, I don't think that diminishes, you know, your standards. And, like, I think that's part of it. It's like... It becomes kind of like this conglomeration of, do you have the standard of production and, you know, commitment to consistency that we would associate with something that people would pay money for. Like, that's the thing that it always comes down to is, like, would someone pay money for this? Because capitalism is inescapable.
At the same time, sometimes people don't consider someone a professional until they make their whole living.
Right.
I think the thing.
I think that's
as a theater writer, like, the notion of making my whole living off of theater writing is, like, that's the pipe dream. That's, like, the goal. That's, like, okay, I might hit that when I'm 50 if I'm lucky.
Yeah.
Like, you do not make your whole living off of the musicals you write unless you are, like, yeah, you have to put a lot of work into it, but, like, 80% of it is fucking luck. So, I want to reject that notion, but at the same time, if I'm talking to someone who, you know, isn't in theater, isn't in a creative field, and they ask what I do, I'm probably going to say, I work front of house at a couple theaters and teach piano lessons, you know? Because people expect you to say what you do for a living.
I think that that's kind of a trap, too. And, like, again, you know, because capitalism is omnipresent in our society, like, it's hard to look past that and be like, oh, yeah, I feel like I've reached a certain standard of, like, quality and expectation. But, like, at the same time, if you use makes their whole living off of creative work as your metric, you are suddenly going to exclude a lot of people that you would say are professional blanks. I don't know if you mind me segueing into your outline point here.
Actually, I was just about to say this is the perfect place to segue into the outline point.
So Anna has a note on the outline about an experience that I had related to a writer that was in the Homestuck fandom, Aisha Farah, who is currently, she is undisputably a professional writer. She makes a significant, if not all of her living through game writing right now.
She writes for games. She writes for a couple podcasts.
Yeah, she does.
Like, she works on a lot of projects.
Yeah, she works for, you know, an indie game studio. She does podcast writing. She probably does other stuff too. She's got a Patreon for, you know, independent creative stuff. And, like, she wrote for the original Friend Sim and for the Hiveswap games. I would say indisputably a professional writer. Even back then, a professional writer. And, like, when I first came into the Homestuck fandom, I looked at Aisha and I was like, wow, that's really cool. And at the same time, I was kind of like, I was doing more writing. I was taking it more seriously. I was doing it in more of a what you would call a professional approach to it. And I was thinking about, well, maybe I can make a living at this one day. And the problem is, like, the salaries for writers are not nearly as good as the salary for a experienced software developer. So that makes it hard to transition there. But then I ran into a little blurb, a little factoid that I didn't know about before, which is that Aisha, in, I think it was 2019, when she was working on all these Homestuck projects in a definitely professional capacity, was also working as a barista because she wasn't getting paid enough doing, like, a Homestuck visual novel to make a living. And it's like, oh, wait a minute. It's like something clicked where it's like, oh, wait, I don't have to do this exclusively to approach it in a professional way. And it's like, there's so many creative fields that are so undervalued or so hard to break into that, like, lots of people who are incredible creatives are going to be doing this in a limited capacity where, like, yeah, maybe they're making some money at it, people respect their work, but they're just not making enough to pay the bills. Like, I remember reading somewhere that, like, the average income for a full-time professional novelist is like $10,000 a year. It's like, that is not enough to pay half of rent in New York.
Yeah, if you're making money as a writer, you're doing, like, ad copy. You're doing, like, listicles.
Yeah.
You don't make money as a writer. I mean, hell, we all know about the WGA strike that just ended. We all know how poorly people, at the very least, were paid in writers' rooms. And, like, even with the New Deal, it's, like, livable now.
Yeah.
Not, like, atrocious, but I wouldn't say that people are going to be having a super comfortable, worry-free life now.
Because people always like, they get the idea that like, oh, you're a writer in Hollywood, you must be making like bank off of that. But then like the WGA during the strike was talking about like 80% of their writers were making under the $26,000 a year threshold to get benefits. And it's like, okay, $26,000 a year is barely livable if you are a single person with no children. Like,
and this is if they're not just $26,000, but it's $26,000 in LA.
Right.
Which is worse than New York City.
And this is, mind you, making under that threshold. Not every one of them is making exactly that amount of money. So there's definitely an issue of like, there aren't nearly as many professional full-time careers in any creative field than there are professional whatevers. This is like similar to when I talked to my mom for our first anti-capitalist podcast, where it's like, yeah, she was a professional musician for a few years, and she was working as an administrative assistant to make ends meet because, what else is she gonna do? Like, pay rent playing bassoon gigs? Like,
I mean, there's a reason why so many professional musicians just teach lessons.
Yeah, exactly.
You have this skill, and honestly, this is a hard truth that I feel like I've learned in the last year. If you are going into a creative field, you better get used to working with children because your creative expertise will only be respected if you are teaching it to children.
Oh, 100%.
Like, I grew up always being like, oh, I never want to be a teacher. I've watched my parents be teachers forever. This is the thing that I know I don't want to follow in my parents' footsteps. Years later, look at me now. I teach piano lessons.
Bam, teacher.
Yeah, it gets me money.
Yeah.
And, someone playing at bassoon in an orchestra who isn't making ends meet is gonna, teach bassoon lessons to the little kids who need to learn how to play for their band concert coming up.
Yeah.
Like, that's where music is respected more. Mm-hmm. Except, of course, school systems are cutting music programs left and right to the point where half of my students, if I ask them if they've been in a choir when they're taking voice lessons, say that their school doesn't have a choir. And it's like, what fucking school doesn't have a choir?
Yeah, that's crazy.
So, I want to dive into why we only consider professional art respectable. Mm-hmm. Like, why being into fan art or being into like something that's clearly made by a young person getting started is something that we're supposed to be ashamed of. Like, so I want to talk about Famisi.
Right.
We all love Famisi. They wrote some of the most iconic songs in the fandom, in the Homestuck fandom. They have some really good original songs. They have some really good non-Homestuck songs. Yeah. Their song Daughter of God is like one of my favorite like lyrical works of art ever. I love their their lyric writing in general is fantastic. I want to be able to recommend Daughter of God to more people. But like, even if I'm not gonna be like, hey, there's this song about this obscure visual novel about kids at a conversion therapy camp that I think you should listen to. Like, even if I don't like go into what the song Daughter of God is about, right, I feel like I can't recommend it to people because while it is on Spotify, that song and basically everything by Famisi is it's rough. Yeah. Like, the production is very rough. It's, you can hear the squeaking of the guitar strings. You can hear, like, it's out of tune. Like, they don't use Melodyne. They don't use any software to tune their voice. The theory, for those of you who have been following my channel for many years, you may remember the video essay I did analyzing the theory of Famisi's music. The theory makes no sense. It makes absolutely no sense because there is no theory behind it. I feel like if I recommend a Famisi song to somebody who works in the world of music, they're gonna be like, what the fuck is your music taste? Why is your music taste this song that was clearly written in someone's basement with no production quality to it? But honestly, I love that kind of stuff. I love the kind of amateur, poorly produced music that you can build on in your mind.
Right.
Like, I can hear a Famisi song and it's like, oh, okay. But this gives a framework for something that would be so cool orchestrated. Yeah. Like my two like sides of music I like are either super pared down, super low production music, or like fully orchestrated, like everything has been put into this. There's like a string section and a horn section and like kind of thing, you know?
So I mean, like, if you'll permit your guest to go on a somewhat extended rant, I have a few thoughts on this. I mean, the really short answer, I think, is it's capitalism, baby. Because, like...
I mean, is that not the whole purpose of this podcast?
Because, like, what we consider to be professional generally boils down to, would you pay money for this? Not, does it cost money, or was it made for money, but is it of a quality that you would pay money for? And then you kind of wrap back into, like, okay, but what does that mean? Because, like, there are people that pay money for, like, very rough, like, indie games. There's a big difference between that and, like, a AAA game. And it's like the art world and the terminology we use would be so different if the whole, like, can you make a living at this? Would you pay for it? Like, wasn't a factor. Like, if we lived in a society where money wasn't a thing, or where you didn't have to make a living doing your art to make it, like, I feel like you'd see a lot of different kind of creative output. And also, like, the level of respect given to different creative output would be different. Like, I'm thinking a lot about computer games when I'm saying this. So, like, computer games originally, back in the 80s, when they were first being developed by hobbyists, were a very, like, kind of independent, very underground thing. It was like one guy making a game and doing all the assets. Like, they were much simpler. There were games you could buy for money, but there were also a lot that were, you know, given away or you know, they were shared around, and or you buy them through, like, mail order. And games as a medium, you know, evolved and became, you know, you have commercial games that started to become a thing. You have console gaming become a thing. And then you always have this undercurrent of, like, indie games and modders, people that take existing games and modify them. And those all kind of blend together and come in and out. It's like, so, you know, you've got things like mods for Doom, and then that becomes a whole game in and of itself, where you have games like, even going back a long time, games like Heretic or Hexen or Strife, where they were made using the Doom engine. And, you know, in a lot of ways, they're very similar to a mod that changes everything about the game. And it's like, you know, those lines become blurry. The line between a hobbyist and a professional becomes blurry. The line between someone who starts to sell something independently and ends up, you know, refining it and becoming more respected. And, like, again, I think it's really hard to draw that line. You know, the fact that money comes into the equation makes things hard. And then when you get into, like, the question of, like, fan works, it becomes hard too, because, you know, you can spend just as much time on a fanfic as someone might spend writing a professional piece of work. Most people don't, but, like, you can. And also, like, again, the line becomes blurry because you've got things like the Star Wars Extended Universe books that I liked as a child, which are basically fanfic, but, like, professional quality fanfic that was edited and refined and sold for money. And it's like, at a certain point, it's like, the line is just, it's not a line, it's like this big hazy blob. and how much something falls into one or the other is, like, it's kind of a function of the individual person interpreting it. Like, I personally would tend to look at it as, what are the standards you hold yourself to? Like, for me, professionalism is about being willing to treat something as if it's going to be consumed by an audience, God, I hate the term consuming art.
It's so capitalistic.
For me, I think that professionalism is about like treating your art as if it's going to be for an audience, as if someone else is going to be looking at it other than you, and you want to refine it to the point where you're saying something intentional to that audience, and you're presenting them with something that is polished and edited. When I write fanfic, just regular fanfic, I write for fun. I don't edit it very much. I write it quickly, it's for fun. It's not intended, I mean, people can read it, but it's not really like for them. But if I write something that is like the stuff I write for Friendsum too, that actually has been like edited and reviewed and tested and refined a little bit. So like for me, that's kind of more the line is like you're acting in a way where you're more conscious of your audience and less conscious just of your own creative output. And like, I don't know, I don't think it's good or bad one way or the other, but like so much of the time things get bogged down in like, would you pay for this? And that's such a weird way to look at art if you really start to think about it. It's like,
Oh, God, yeah.
Is it professional if you'd pay $20 for it, but if you'd only pay $5 for it, nah, not anymore. If you wait for the Steam sale,
doesn't feel fair, you know, because people don't want to pay money for art. Period.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I have a couple albums available on Bandcamp. If you would be interested in checking the link in the description, Gamer Girl Floodwater is available on all streaming services and also Bandcamp for about $7. But, like, people don't want to spend $7 on an album. No one wants to... I mean, yes, people will do it because they specifically want to support the artist. Yeah. But if they don't care about specifically supporting this artist, people don't want to pay $7 for 12 songs. Yeah. Because they can get it for free if they already pay for Spotify. And instead of me getting $7, I get 7 cents, maybe, if I'm lucky.
I feel like the framework gets very much warped by the fact that we're all existing within capitalism and we have to, like, you know, pay rent and stuff. And, like, that's part of the reason that I do a lot of creative things, but also, like, I don't see myself ever not doing my job, my day job, because my day job pays me money consistently and provides me with benefits. And I need those things because I live in capitalism and I live in New York, and New York is not cheap. And like, don't get me wrong. I like my job a lot, actually. It's fairly interesting. It is mostly not too stressful. I like my coworkers and I like the company I work for, and it pays me well. But it's not, I wouldn't say it's a creative job. Like, there are creative aspects to doing back-end software development. There are problem-solving aspects, but it's not, you know, I'm not making an artistic vision. I'm making a back-end software for insurance examiners to use. Like, a success at my job is whether or not they get frustrated having to work with the software, not whether or not they have, like, this eye-opening narrative experience with it.
So,
yeah,
in the world of amateur fan art, if you've gotten to a point where you've honed your craft enough that you can take it really seriously and create stuff intended for an audience rather than just intended for yourself and your friends.
Yeah.
By your definition, you can consider yourself a professional.
Yeah, I think the definition is kind of a slippery one because, like, I think that innately it's tied to capitalism.
But say you're the kind of fanfic writer who has spent many, many years writing fanfic, and people really like your fanfic, and people will, say, commission you to write fanfics for them.
Yeah, see, that's the thing. Is like, I think you get to the point where people are starting to commission you to do stuff. You could say, yeah, I'm a professional blank. Or where you're doing something that involves, like, you know, professional pipeline or something like that. Like, again, I'm thinking of Friendsum too, where it's like, I'm not being paid for it, but that's because I'm funding it. I think at the end of the day, like, you know, you can call yourself whatever you want. And, like, I think if you say, I'm a professional writer because you're a fanfic writer who, like, puts a ton of work into their craft and you know, creates these stories that are on par with professional, you know, sold for money books in a universe, something like the Star Wars or the Star Trek books. Like, if you said I'm a professional writer, people would be like, oh, really? You've been paid to write? And you'd be like, well, no. And they'd be like, huh, you're not a professional then. It's like, I don't know. It becomes a kind of a weird, like, catch-22 where you're just like, I don't know.
This makes me think of something absolutely wild I recently found out regarding people considering fan fiction a valuable asset. For years, we both know this, for years fan fiction was like, okay, if you write fanfic, that's shameful. Yeah. That's not real writing. Yeah. Reading fanfic is not reading a real book.
Yeah.
Well, so my sister works at a bookstore, an indie bookstore that has visiting writers come in and give talks about their books and whatnot. And one of the visiting writers was like asked by somebody, like, what's something that can help you get published? And she said, if you have a large following on AO3, that is an asset.
Yeah.
Publishers have started to realize that fanfic authors can bring in an audience. Yeah. And that blows my mind, because for the longest time, I always considered fanfic as like, okay, yeah, you can write your real stuff, but you have to hide that you do fanfic. You can write your fan music and also write the real stuff, but if you show anyone your fan music, you can't tell them it's fan music. Right. Like, for so long, it's like, oh, your fan stuff has to be hush-hush. But now, we've entered an era where people are realizing that that is a valuable audience in the capitalism world.
Yeah, like, and I know, like, a lot more authors, like professional full-time authors now have talked about, like, writing fanfic. And the thing is, like, I think in part that's just a shifting demographic. The average, like, writer now is going to be more likely to be a millennial. Yeah, of course they wrote fanfic. Like, that you know, that is, as of the millennials, as of, like, my age, that's a normal thing to have done as a teenager. Like, that was a thing you could actually do that had, like, a community.
If you're 40 or under and you haven't written fanfic, what do you do with your teenage
like, it's like,
years?
yeah, it's like asking writers if they watch television, and at a certain point, the answer would have gone from no, of course not, to yes, of course, because, like, stuff changes over time. I think that that's a good example. And, like, again, you know, I think there's a lot of slipperiness to the term. Like, if you say, oh, I had this professionally published, usually what that means is you had a company that actually, like, tries to make money at it, not just that you put it out and sold it.
Yeah, there's a pretty clear distinction between working with a publisher and self-publishing.
Like, I have...
Because, you know, anybody can have a book bound, can pay a company to buy their book. I
sold 11 copies of a piece of Homestuck fan work that I did. I am very proud of it. It is very nice looking. I would say it's a professional quality piece of work. I don't know if I could call myself a professional Homestuck fanfic writer. I don't know. I think it's a really vague, amorphous concept that changes over time. I don't know. People get so worked up in it, like what the line is and what the difference is. And it's like, at the end of the day, like, if you want to make something, you can make something. And, like, if you sell it to people because they'll buy it and you want to make a little money to support yourself, like, cool. You know, be aware of the legal ramifications if you're trying to do that with fan work. But, like, if you make your own creative output and sell it to people, like, good for you.
But, like, also, like, that's the other thing. Like, we shouldn't only value the stuff that was made to be professional.
Yeah, no.
We should be able to appreciate the things that are a little rough around the edges. It shouldn't feel shameful when telling someone about something really cool you saw, if that something really cool was made by someone who maybe isn't trained in the kinds of things that make something feel really polished. Like, the thing that makes music feel really polished is less the quality of the song itself. Like, you can have a song that has music theory all over the fucking place. You can have a song that is pretty pared down in instrumentation and doesn't have a whole lot of technique behind it. The thing that makes it feel professional is the mixing. Like, 100% the mixing.
I think that's really important, because, like, you know, you get so wrapped up in this, like, debate over semantics, and it's like, I kind of come back to, like, one of the points that I first made when we were talking earlier. It's like, there are two things that I think I could say indisputably that I am a professional at. One of them being the thing I'm literally paid to do for a living, which is software development, and the other being photography, which is the creative thing I have done the most consistently for the longest and have been professionally published at. And neither of those things is something I have a formal education in, which meant that at one point I just had to keep doing them and learning them on my own until I got better at them. And, you know, like, I think that's important to keep in mind, because it's like, you know, the whole sucking at something is the first step to being kind of good at it. And it's like, yeah, if you want to learn how to do something, like, yeah, you could go to school for it, but even if you go to school for it, you're still going to have to do it on your own.
That's true. You never stop learning new things about your field, and that's something that is kind of not taught in schools. Like, it feels like, oh, school is the be-all, end-all of things. But you know what's good for anybody in any kind of professional field? Taking an out-of-school class about something. Or, like, you know, people who go through music school will still take lessons. You don't stop taking music lessons when you graduate music school. You just, you know, pay someone who's slightly more experienced to have, like, an hour or two with them.
And, like, if you never did it, if you just did the bare minimum you needed to, like, get your degrees and never did any other composition, like, you would not be nearly as good a composer. And, like, you know, I you know, software development is a constant, you know, ever-evolving thing. You learn all the time because stuff is always changing. And, like, photography is something I've spent a lot of time, you know, refining, like, learning about, like, learning both from, you know, my own experience, learning from other photographers, learning from, like, books, websites, whatever, you know, just like, oh, this works, this doesn't work, this is a thing I can do, this is an editing technique I can use. Like, you always have to be refining what you're doing to get better at it. And, like, even if you've got all the certifications and all the stamps, that doesn't mean that you've arrived and you're done. Like,
you're never done in a creative field. You can spend a lifetime working on one creative work and never feel like you're done. Like, that's... Capitalism has made everything so linear. It's like, okay, you go through public school, you go to college and get your degree. If it's not a terminal degree, you get another degree. If that's not a terminal degree, you get another degree. Once you're done getting all your degrees and spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on degrees, then you get an entry-level job. And then you move up the ranks and move up and up and up and just keep making more money until you make the most money that your qualifications can let you make. And then you are done. And you do that for the rest of your life. But that doesn't work with creativity. That doesn't work with creative fields. It doesn't work with any kind of art. You are not, like... You don't go from, okay, I'm working on a small indie project, now I'm working on a larger indie project, now I'm working on a big thing that, like a big, like, you know, AAA game or Hollywood film or Broadway show, and this is where I'm gonna be forever. Like, no. If you work on a show that goes to Broadway, that's fucking incredible. The next show you work on might be a regional production. The next show you work on might be, you know, you get your show to Broadway and that's like, oh my god, you've hit the big times. But the next show you write still needs to go through all of the, you know, you gotta workshop it, then you take it off Broadway or you take it to a regional thing and you workshop it some more and take it to more and more theaters and then it's ready for Broadway again. Nothing is straight up linear.
Yeah, and unlike if you know, if someone tells you that an indie game and a AAA game are like 2 points on the same line, they don't know anything about anything. And it's like, maybe maybe they're both games, but like, and there's some commonality in certain aspects of production, but like, the whole experience could be different just at its core, and like the whole goal is different. So it's like, yeah, I don't think it's something as simple as like, oh, you do something and you're an amateur and then you do it enough and you become a professional and you make money at it and you're good. It's more sort of all over the place. And like, you know, you can do stuff and stop and come back to it, or do different aspects of it, you know, change up your art form. I think the constant is going to be that you're creating something because, like, you know, you're driven to do it. Like, if you just want to make a lot of money, there's a lot of fields that are better.
If you want to make a lot of money, don't become an artist. Become an artist because you like art. Because you feel passionate about the thing you want to create. Because creating gives you a kind of thrill that you don't think you'd be able to live with.
And like, I don't anticipate making a living off of art. But that doesn't matter. I still want to do it because it still matters to me, you know? I don't know. I think people get really wrapped up in like, how are we going to define this? And how are we going to make sure it's like real certified TM art? I think one of the core things that gets stripped away in the debate about, you know, a professional artist versus the amateur artist is like, art is supposed to make you feel things. It's supposed to evoke emotion. It's supposed to be a way to express yourself and express your emotions and transfer them to other people. It's like, it's such a fundamental human experience. And it's like, one of the things I absolutely hate that's a product of capitalism. And you see it with stuff like, you know, generative AI art and you know, you see it with the way that writers are treated, or the way that actors are treated, or the way that professional visual artists are treated. It's like art becomes a content factory. It becomes a way to churn out content. And what is content? Who fucking cares as long as people buy it? And it's like, I don't know. I see like the AI bros where they're like, oh yeah, art is about making infinite content. And it's like, no, it's not. It's about feeling something and communicating something, not just like generating, you know, 10,000 variants on like big boob anime lady, you know, cartoon style, good AI, good, make it look good. Like, it's like, this is stupid.
I don't understand the kinds of people who are like, oh yeah, AI can write all our TV shows. Like, do you not feel things when you watch a TV show? Like, even things that are like sitcoms,
like,
you still feel things in a good sitcom. I mean, fuck. The Good Place, my favorite fucking sitcom in the world. I cry so hard every time I watch the finale, and I've seen the finale like 4 times. That scene at the... It's been out for like 5 years now. This isn't a spoiler anymore. That the scene at the end with Chidi, like that, fucking hell. That's a sitcom. It's not. I mean, yeah, it's a continuous. It's not like episodic, but like it's not, you know, HBO drama kind of thing that's like made with cinematic quality. It's a sitcom, but it's so well written because they had excellent writers. Imagine if you tried to get a robot to fucking AI to write The Good Place. No.
So I was reading an article recently by a game developer, and he's talking about like why he doesn't see AI as being something that is valuable to game writing. And he talks about, I think it was the quote from, I'm probably going to completely butcher this, but the meaning is there. It was like, I think one of the writers of The Wire, and someone asking like, basically, hey, wouldn't you rather have like a computer that could just like come up with ideas for you? Not write for you, just come up with ideas for you. And his response was basically, I'd rather be shot in the head. And it's like, yeah, I don't, like, this process is one that is, you know, it's about going through that journey of creation and understanding and, like, becoming familiar with your own work and making something that means something to you. And, like, I think that's what art is all about. And, like, you don't have to do it for money for that to be valuable. You don't have to be a professional for that to be valuable. It doesn't have to mean anything. That phrase doesn't have to mean anything for that to be valuable. Like, I think that you run into an area where, you see art as just churning out as much content as you possibly can, infinite procedural content, and it's like, yeah, I don't want to just, like, gorge myself on slop forever. That doesn't sound fun.
An AI could write a reality. Sure, I guess.
Yeah.
Maybe. But, like, do you really want to watch, like, reality TV for the rest of your life? Don't you enjoy well-written TV shows?
I saw this list of all these, like, weird 2000s reality shows, and it's like, yeah, this stuff was weird. It wasn't even because of the writer's strike. It was before the writer's strike. It's like, they were just throwing everything at the wall. And I remember watching a couple of those shows.
So, yeah, to wrap this up, so we've been talking a lot about how professional art it's a gray area. You can get to the quality of professional through being a fan creator or through just working on stuff yourself. What are some tips that you would give to somebody who's not planning on getting a degree in an artistic field but still wants to create professional art? I will say what I think when it comes to if you want to create music at a professional level but you don't want to get a composition degree or a, performance degree or anything like that. I mean, definitely take some music lessons. Like, you don't have to spend your life savings on a degree, but if you want to be, like, a singer-songwriter, like, take some lessons. Make sure that you're playing your instrument healthfully. If you're a singer, make sure you're singing healthfully. You don't want to accidentally ruin your voice because you don't know how to sing without hurting it. You don't want to accidentally ruin your wrist because you don't know how to play guitar without hurting it. That's something that I should do one day, is, like, take a guitar lesson to make sure I'm not going to give myself a wrist injury by trying to self-teach. So definitely take some music lessons. And if you want to be a composer, specifically a, like, primarily MIDI composer, so like a game composer, a film composer who never plans on having enough money to hire an orchestra, take a mixing class. That will be what makes your music feel like it's not made by somebody who is a kid in their basement. And with, like, theory and all that, learn some theory. If you can learn without taking classes, there's lots of resources on YouTube, lots of theory YouTube channels, but maybe there's a theory tutor out there for you. Maybe there's a theory class that you can take to start understanding the basics and then pick up after that. Learn jazz theory. Don't not learn jazz theory. I wish my undergrad required jazz theory for composers, because jazz theory makes your music sound better. Jazz theory will make your music sound more complex. If you don't want to do the 4-year degree, if you don't have the money and you don't feel like it's going to be useful, there are people out there who are making plenty of money as, like, game composers and whatnot who don't have a music degree. Jonaya, what are the things that you would say, like, make someone's photography feel really good? What are some things that photographers that are just starting out, don't have the money for a photography degree?
I feel like there's kind of two parts of this question as you originally asked it. One is what are the things I can do to make my technical skills approach that of someone who makes a living at this? And the other is, how do I actually make a living at this or make money at it?
Well, that's something that I am still trying to figure out when it comes to music.
So I think the answer to the second question is shorter, unfortunately somewhat less optimistic, but also important to hear, which is that be prepared to not. Be ready to not make money at it. If you want to make money at doing a creative thing and you're not in a pipeline to, like, be hired when you graduate of school, be willing to accept that it might take you a while to build up clients or to get, into galleries or to sell a game or to sell a book or to, make enough money off of short story collections or whatever, or to get consistent voice work. Like, there's a lot of creative people out there. There's a lot of very good creative people out there, and there isn't a shortcut to just, like, continuing to do the thing and put yourself out there until something sticks. Like that, it's a crappy sounding answer, but like it's true. Like eventually someone will notice your work and they'll hire you to do a thing. Be willing to accept that. It's like the advice with writing. It's always get comfortable with rejection, because there's a lot of writers and there's a lot of good writers. And just because you're rejected doesn't mean you're a worthless person who can't write. It means that there's a lot of writers. That's the short answer to that part. And then the technical one is like any one discipline you could go on forever. And like there's definitely a lot of like highlights for different ones. Like for photography, one of the things that a lot of new photographers don't take into account is just how important editing is, and how becoming good at editing is important, especially in digital photography. Like, you know, the difference between an image that's like, you know, well framed but like kind of bland and an image that's really like evocative can be how well you pull out the details in that image in the editing process. There's a million elements of photography about, you know, framing and lighting and exposure and composition and the use of leading lines, and like I don't know that there's any one singular thing. Similarly for other fields, you know, writing, there's all sorts of stuff about how to develop character and pacing and structure. And when it comes to software and game dev, it's, you know, structure and organization and, you know, code flow and, you know, how well the game feels when you play it. But I think the kind of unifying aspect is like being willing to refine your own process, like being willing to step back, look at your work, and be like, how can I make this better? Like, you don't have to trash yourself. You don't have to be like, oh, I'm the worst artist ever. I'm terrible. I'm a failure. But like, that's not helpful. But also, it's not helpful to be like, yeah, this is perfect, and I'm not going to change. I'm not going to do anything differently. Like, you want to look at your work and be like, okay, I like this about it. I don't like that about it. And get other people's feedback on it, and listen to that feedback, and listen to that feedback, you know, with a critical ear too, because like sometimes people will say stuff that's like, okay, that's clearly based in your specific preference.
Other people's feedback might be like the number one most valuable thing once you get out of school too. I'm working on a new musical right now, and I haven't shown it to a lot of people yet. I want to find venues to show it to people. I want to find a way that I can get some critique from other composers, because honestly, that was one of the most useful things about grad school, was showing my musical to a whole bunch of different people multiple times a week for a year. Like, that helps you get better. Getting advice from other people, getting like a sprinkling of an idea that can catapult you into something that you would have never thought of otherwise. Feedback from others is, honestly, there should just be more like safe, good quality feedback groups for all artistic pursuits.
One of the things that helped me to really push my photography a few years ago was like actually talking to other photographers and like looking at what they did that worked or didn't work. And like, you know, everyone's got their own different perspective, and you can kind of like, you can take that and you can integrate it into your own workflow or your own process. And like, you always want to kind of loop back in on it and be like, okay, how am I feeling about this? Is it working? If you're working on something collaborative, like if you're working on a game that has a team, like having other people take a look at what you're doing and be like, okay, this works, this doesn't work. I mean, that's like the foundation of, you know, QA, quality assurance in gaming. It's like you want people to take a look at what you're doing, and then take that feedback. And like, you don't just take every piece of feedback. You look at it, you synthesize it, you decide what you want to change. And like, sometimes feedback will be something that's like, just the person wants more of this. Like I wish you would focus entirely on this other character. It's like, that might not be super useful feedback because it might not be the point of the work.
And people also have like personal preferences that might not be yours. Maybe someone will be like, well, here's an example from my thesis show. I brought in the opening number to my musical, and someone was like, I love that in most of this you're not using a strong dominant fifth, but then sometimes you use the strong dominant fifth and it throws me off. But he was the only person who thought that. I showed it to a couple more people, and I liked the way that the dominant fifth... For people who don't understand music theory, I'm talking gibberish. But it was a chord that I thought increased the intensity at certain points when the intensity wasn't there at the other points, and it didn't feel off to me, and it didn't feel off to other people. It was just this one person's personal preference. And sometimes one person's personal preference will make you think, oh, I didn't think about it that way. Maybe it would sound cool if I tried
like
it.
Exactly. Like it could be like, I don't like the high contrast look in your photography. I think you should try like a soft focus instead. I think that would really look cool. And like maybe that isn't what you're going for with those specific images, but maybe that gets you thinking about trying a different editing approach or a different shooting approach in the future. And like, I don't think that it's a static process where there's like a right way to do it. I think that it's an ever evolving, feedback loop of, refining something until you get to a point where you're happy with it. And then, so the other part that I wanted to mention, and I really wanted to call this out, is like for any art, for anything you do creatively, I think one of the most important things is to do it. Because like a lot of people, and you see this a lot with writers, a lot with inexperienced writers, is like they spend so much time thinking about what they want to create and so little time actually going forward and doing it. It's like writers that spend all their time on world building, or they spend all their time like planning out the story. And it's like, at the end of the day, if you want to make art, you have to make art. Or photographers that talk all the time about their different technology, their different lenses, their camera bodies, their editing process. Oh, I've got this cool film development process. And it's like, but if you never take a picture of anything, what are you doing? Like, you're basically like a tech hobbyist, but for photography. And it's like, regardless of what art you're doing, universally, if you want to do it, not even forget working professionally, if you want to be better at it, you have to do it. And certainly if you want to, get out there and do it as a thing you make money at, you're going to have to like make art and put it out there for people. I don't think the endless content churn is a good thing, but also like you do need to make art. And I think that that's important to keep in mind, because it's very easy to get bogged down in like the contemplative part of the process and just kind of not go forward into the actual doing it. Like you sit there thinking about what you want to write forever and you never write it. It's like you can always go back and edit stuff you make. You can always refine it, but you can't refine something that doesn't exist. And like, I think that's one of the key things is like, if you want to do a thing, eventually you got to just go for it. You want to do voice acting, and I'm mostly basing this off of the experience of professional voice actors that I'm friends with. If you want to do voice acting professionally, you got to just do it and submit a shitload of auditions, because that's the only way to get work, because there's a lot of voice actors. There's a lot of talented voice actors.
And also from the perspective of someone who is not really a professional voice actor, but who has done a decent amount of voice acting, if you want to do voice acting and, get better at it, and you're not at the point where you'd be comfortable sending in auditions, which, if you're just starting out, if you've never worked a mic before, yeah, your auditions are probably going to sound pretty, not great quality, and people are going to pass over you. Just record stuff. Like, I've told people in my YouTube comments this all the time, where people like ask me if my channel is open for auditions. I've gotten this on all sorts of my dub videos, and I don't open my channel up for auditions. I work with my friends. I ask my friends to voice on my videos because it's a fun thing I do with my friends. It's not a like company that I have to fill vacancies for. If there is a vacancy, I will ask friends who, if they have any other friends who do voice acting. this is me talking to everybody in my YouTube comments. I'm not opening up auditions. If you want to do voice acting, if you want to do comic dubs, if you want to dub silly Tumblr posts or Am I the Assholes or anything like that, just do it. Get a mic. It doesn't have to be an expensive mic. If you don't know if you're going to do this for a long time, you can... My mic came from Craigslist. It's a pretty decent, like, you know, it's not the most expensive mic, but it's an XLR. Mine came from Craigslist. It was about $100 for both the mic and the interface. So look for something used. Or, I mean... Listen, we all make fun of the snowball, but it's a good, like, starter if you don't know if you want to actually do this professionally.
There's a big debate in the world of voice acting about mics and stuff, and, like, the truth is, like, if you're working a mid-tier professional project, like, if you can get clean, good audio out of the snowball, who cares? The end result is going to be important, and, like, the level of what you're trying to get, like, if you're trying to do a fucking anime voiceover... That's probably not going to cut it, but, like, you know, if you're doing, like, an indie game.
But if you want to try this out, you don't have to audition for a project.
Oh, yeah.
You don't have to get on someone's YouTube channel or be part of a dub group. You can just go online, type Reddit Am I the Asshole into Google, and find the funniest Am I the Asshole posts you can find, and just read them. Read them in funny voices, read them in your own voice, create a narration voice, post it online if you want, don't post it online if you want. That's going to be the most valuable thing to get started. Just do it.
I will say two other things that you kind of reminded me of. One, if you want to get started in the world of indie games, the best way to do that is to make an indie game. There are a lot of indie creators where it's just one or two people that are doing the thing. We have looped back around to the 1980s when it was hobbyists making games on their own. And honestly, if you want to get into game dev, doing that, doing game jams, that kind of stuff, really good way to get into it. Second, completely unrelated point, photography gear and audiovisual gear. Buy used equipment. Buy well cared for used equipment because camera lenses don't go bad. And headphones and microphones, if well treated, last forever. And honestly, camera bodies have a lifespan of like 1 million shutter clicks, which is a whole fucking lot. And you could save a lot of money buying used equipment. Even high-end equipment. That's not super related to anything, but if you're trying to get into something and you wanna build up the equipment you need, like that, the cost is a factor.
And like if you can't afford a degree, you probably also can't afford to buy a $1,000 microphone.
You know, depending on what you're doing, there are sometimes startup costs. Like, you know, if you want to make games, you can get like fucking RPG Maker and some freeware software to do your assets, and a lot of free assets you can use commercially, and like, you know, off you go. But if you want to be a professional photographer, you gotta have like a decent-ish camera and some decent-ish lenses, and that is unfortunately not inexpensive. So there is a barrier to entry. Now, you can get a pretty good camera for $500 or $600 used, and you can get a pretty good lens for $500 or $600 used, but like that's still $1,000. It's not nothing. But if you bought all that stuff new, it would cost you twice that, if not more.
That's unfortunately another thing that will make your music sound more professional is if you buy sound libraries or purchase access to sound libraries, because my music started sounding like something that, you know, came from a high-quality video game or would be something you would listen to on Spotify when I stopped using Logic's built-in MIDI instruments. They're free, and that's great, and you can tell that they're free. I use the East West Composer Cloud, which for students is $10 a month. They haven't figured out I'm not a student anymore, so it's still $10 a month for me. So if you are currently a student, get that now, and it will be like that for as long as you don't tell them. I also use the Addictive Keys piano sound that came free with my keyboard. A lot of times, like keyboards or mics or things like physical equipment will come with either like a single piano sound or like a demo library. My old keyboard came with a couple contact sounds. I used the contact marimba sound in so much of the music I wrote in 2019 specifically. I will never use that sound again, oh my god. But like, it was a sound that came free, but it was better than what you get in the built-in Logic thing. So like, collect music libraries, collect MIDI libraries, instrument libraries. That's going to make your music sound better. If you can afford to drop $200 on a really nice piano sound with a lot of control to it, go for it. That'll make your music sound gorgeous. I don't have that kind of money. I'm using the one that came free with my keyboard, but it sounds better than the one in Logic, and it sounds better than the one that East West has, so.
I think that going out and doing the thing is the most important thing. Like, you should, start doing it. Like, if you want to be a photographer, fucking start with your phone even, and pay attention to things like like composition, framing, and scene.
And like start doing some photo editing with what you've got. And I mean, especially if you have one of the newer iPhones with like 4 cameras, or like, you have Androids. Are Android cameras really good?
They're fine. I mean, my standard for every phone camera is compared to a
very high.
D850, which is one of the highest end cameras that Nikon makes. I think all the phone cameras are garbage by comparison. But like, no, the Android camera's fine. Like, I've taken some photos I really like on my phone. Again, you gotta go do it. If all you've got is a phone camera, if you could start to be more intentional about the work you're doing and refine your process, then that's a good starting point, and you can always go from there. Yeah, I think, like, wrapping all the way back around to one of the first things we talked about, like, how do you define a professional? I think, like, a simpler and maybe not wholly accurate, but I think, like, valuable answer would be a professional creative is someone who can consistently deliver intentional results in a field. They can do what they want to do on purpose consistently. Like, a professional photographer is someone that if you send them out to take pictures, they will deliver you consistent results of the style that you know that they take pictures in, because like there's a lot of subjectivity there. And like, you don't have to worry about like, oh my God, what if they don't get any good pictures? A professional writer is someone who will write in their style consistently on purpose about what they are being, set out to write. So like, I think that is a valuable component, is like the ability to consistently and intentionally repeat a creative process. Like, you've gotten to the point where, succeeding at making the thing you want doesn't just happen by accident, but it happens on purpose, and you can do it again and again and again.
That sounds pretty good. All right. Well, with that, why don't we wrap this up? And let's wrap this up by sharing where we can find some of our professional art. Jonaya, would you like to?
Yeah, sure. So I'm on a bunch of platforms as Jonaya Riley. You can follow me on Twitter or X or whatever the fuck we're calling it these days.
We're not calling it X. It is Twitter. It will always be Twitter. I am dead naming that fucking website.
You can follow me on Twitter at Jonaya Riley. You can follow me on Blue Sky if you're there at Jonaya Riley. You can follow me on Tumblr at Jonaya Riley. If you want to read my fanfic, I'm on AO3 at Jonaya Riley. But like, also, the big project that I've been working on for the past couple of years is, of course, FriendSim 2. You can find that on Steam. Just search for FriendSim 2. That's the number 2. And that is free. 11 volumes are done. We've got 3 more in the works. We are still working on it. That is not something we have dropped or forgotten about. It's just going kind of slow right now, but we're still doing it. Also, if you're interested in playing some other games, if you go to Studio June on itch.io, we have several games. We have FriendSim 2 there as well. It's the same as the Steam version. And we also have a couple of other games which were a collaboration between us and a friend of ours, studio. We have a visual novel called Welcome to Your First Day at a Mazicom, which is a anti-capitalist visual novel about robots. And we also have a Boss Assault Burstius, which is a 2D space shooter with some narrative elements and like a kind of comic tone to it.
Jonaya does good things. Definitely look at all of her things because they're very good. As I mentioned earlier, I do have some albums available on streaming services under Anna Marcus. I have an album of my game music called Gamer Girl Floodwater, and I mentioned earlier how one thing that will really make your music sound professional is if you know how to mix it. The fun thing about Gamer Girl Floodwater is there are 2 tracks on there that I wrote before I took a mixing class, and I bet you can tell which ones they are. If you can figure out which ones they are, let me know and I'll tell you if you're right. Check out my albums on Spotify, streaming services, or you could check them out on Bandcamp, Articulately Composed on Bandcamp. My Twitter is acmusic27. My Tumblr is articulately-composed. And of course, if you are listening to this on YouTube, this is redundant, but my YouTube, where most of my stuff is articulately composed. If you are interested in new musicals at all, I have some songs from my musical Maka on my YouTube channel, but if you are interested in seeing a full staged reading of the show, that is available on Patreon. I would say follow my Instagram, but it is pretty much just a theater advertising spot for people I know local to New York City. I don't post on there unless I have a show coming up, and if I do, all you see are advertisements. So it's not fun for the average articulately composed fan. My TikTok might be fun, though. I'll occasionally post on there. I don't post a ton on there, but that's articulately composed as well. But yeah. I would also normally try and advertise some show I'm working on here, but I am not actually working on a show that will be visible to the public for a while right now. So, yeah, if you're craving new theater, just go to my Patreon, pay me $1. You don't need any more than $1 to see it, and watch the staged reading of Maka. And if you want, give some feedback. As we were saying earlier, feedback is super helpful, and if you are a writer of any kind, or a musician of any kind, or have any knowledge of musical theater, your feedback is valuable. I took the video
of that stage reading.
Yeah,
and
she
all
did.
Of the photos.
And all of the photos, which are available on my website, annamarcushack.com. It's not super interesting unless you are, looking to see my professional portfolio of works, but, it exists. I think, I think we're calling it a day. Thank you all so much for watching. Huge thanks to my patrons, Jonaya Riley, Tev Linsey, Rosalie Ross, Incubi Library, Stinky, Justice Ross, and Jeremy M. If you are interested in checking out my social media, I just mentioned it, but they will be in the links below if you are on YouTube, in the description if you are on Spotify, or whatever you are listening to this to. You'll be able to find the links. Jonaya's will also be in the links below. And if you wanna hang out, chill, talk about music or fandoms or a combination of the two, check out my Discord server, link in the description below. So if you are not listening to this on YouTube, and you don't know my channel, Articulately Composed, I post new videos every other Wednesday. Some of them are things like this podcast, some of them are fun, silly voice acting videos. Some of them are song covers, some are video essays. It's a pretty big, eclectic bunch of types of videos, but everything generally has to do with either fandom, creation, or anti-capitalism. Those are my three vibes, my 3 genres of thing. So yeah, if you want to check me out on YouTube and want to check out the fun voice acting that Jonaya does and the thumbnails she sometimes makes for me and all that, check out my channel in the links below as well. Thank you all so much for watching, and we will see you all next time.
Bye!